All right, welcome to the party, pals. GRC Mafia. I see a whole bunch of people flowing in here. We have Fleetish checking in, AMK, Bentech, a couple other people too, not only IT. Welcome to the party, pal. The engineer background. Rhonda's in here. And then we also got B-Dubs behind the glass. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and go through the introduction to begin with, and then I'll go ahead and get my slide deck pulled up. And then today we're just going to be going over some networking terms, some of the different concepts around it and so forth, particularly around people who may not have any previous knowledge about that at all. There's so many different topics that go into this, and networking is actually one of those things that I don't really relate with that well. I find it very difficult to learn a lot of the concepts. You could go really deep into networking. So what I see a lot of people doing as well, and like what I've considered is like the Net Plus from CompTIA, which is pretty comprehensive. Like I have some of the study materials for that and so forth, and I like a lot of that. But that's if you want to really deep dive into it. There's so many different topics. Today we're just doing like a recap of a lot of the main points. Like I believe AMK had mentioned the TCP IP. I don't even believe that was one of the topics I was going to throw out there. So this is going to be pretty foundational. But also, if you guys have any questions, definitely ask it. If I don't know, then we could figure out the answer together, or I'm sure somebody else knows. So then we're all here for a shared mission to break down barriers, foster collaboration and community, working towards a more secure future. We're all here to learn and grow together. So definitely ask your questions, share your resources, let us know how you're doing and so forth. Don't forget to hop into our Discord server. We also have the live chat where you can share your personal LinkedIn. So that's going to be the best place to drop that. I can open up the stage if anybody would like to come up to ask questions or join the conversation directly. Just let me know and I could drop that link. Monday and Tuesday, we're doing the hands-on. Next week, we're going to be finishing off the risk register that we've been working on this month. Wednesdays is our GRC Let's Get Technical, which is today. And then like tomorrow is our primary meeting, which is 6 p.m. Central Time. And so tomorrow, since it's the middle of the month, we just have open discussions for our primary meeting. That just leaves it pretty wide open. And so there's so much that comes into it, but we wanted to have one meeting every single month where we didn't really have an agenda. So that way people could just bring to the table. Oh, welcome to the party, pal, Chris Hilgado. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I know I've struggled with that in the past. We also got Regine popping in too. And then Fridays is going to be a 1-hour AMA open stage. Now, if you do come up, you do not have to turn on your video, but it would be polite if you turn on your mic at least so we could hear you. And even if you have questions or resources or otherwise that you want to share that don't pertain to exactly what we're talking about, or otherwise, worst case scenario, we could circle back around to it. So anything to do with that cybersecurity, information security, GRC realm and so forth. There's plenty of people out there in the community. We could at least get you in touch with somebody who would know better. Share useful resources. If you don't share anything that you don't want to be public. So if you happen to share something, share a little too much, just reach out to me on Discord or LinkedIn, drop it in chat, or also contact at studygrc.org for us to go ahead and get that fixed. Also our website, so studygrc.org. That's where you're going to find our resources page. You're going to find our calendar with the most up-to-date information. Later this week, maybe this weekend is when I'll go through and schedule out the videos for next month. We have a couple really cool talks coming out the first 2 weeks of next month. And then also some awesome places to check out as well. If you're not familiar, is Simply Cyber. And then also B-Dubs. So Simply Cyber does a daily cyber threat brief every single morning, along with all kinds of other stuff. Also B-Dubs' website. So B-Dubs publishes a article every single Monday. And then PBO was live last night for a Q&A. He goes live every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Where PBO primarily comes in is actually inside of Discord. So you can contact him via email, or you can also just reach out to him on Discord. And he's got like well over 20 years of industry experience, with an interesting background coming from like development into GRC and so forth. Let me go ahead and double check chat. I think there was a couple things here. But yeah, welcome everybody. Yeah, and see, this is also just like a great example. I mean, there's some amazing people in chat, like Chris Elgato for ISO. Bentech has a lot. Regine is also in risk management. Not only IT, comes with that engineering background. Rhonda has a lot of experience as well. Same thing with Bentech. And then also Fleetus. Fleetus also has his YouTube channel. We had done like a live stream last week with him. Yeah, and also like Bentech mentions that they can relate to me not grasping the networking terms easily. Made a lot of progress, surprisingly, from Try Hack Me. Pre-security rooms, yes. So pre-security pathway is one of the, I think, 3 or 4 different pathways that I did complete on Try Hack Me. I like Try Hack Me. I think it was a pretty good experience. I haven't been on there in a while now, but I think it's a really great starting point. There's also a GitHub that has a list of like over like 390 free rooms on Try Hack Me. So yeah, and welcome to the party, pal, everybody. Yeah, even Bentech mentions that it doesn't come easy. Yeah, that's always been my struggle is I've understood like, okay, you know, you connect to the router and then that connects to the internet kind of thing, but there are some complicated things that go into it. So yeah, especially with the IP addresses and subnetting and so forth. There's so much that goes into it. And there's a lot of software out there for all of this as well. Hey, you've got a lot of industry knowledge, Rhonda. Welcome to the party, pal. Lamed 77. I gotta figure out what I gotta grab that new coffee. Jerry's testing out and trialing. All right, now let me go ahead and get this moved over here. If you guys have any questions, definitely drop those. I'm gonna go ahead and get my slide deck pulled up here. And then there's also several different really great resources. So not only that, Try Hack Me, they have a bunch of awesome rooms for it. But then also I'll be dropping this other one quite a bit as well. Let me go ahead and drop this. So if you guys go ahead and open this up, this is going to be a really great resource that I'm going to reference a few different times. This is going to cover a lot of the different stuff that I was going to talk about. And it's from Cloudflare. If you look at it, there's drop downs and so forth for it. Let me go ahead and I'm going to pull that up right now to get the screen sharing up. All right, so yeah, if you take a look at this website here, you'll see that there's drop downs here. So like, what is routing? What is a router? What's a LAN? What's a WAN? What's a CAN? What's a PAN? Like all kinds of different terms. They have a great glossary in here as well, and a lot of these different basic concepts as well. I think this is a really great resource as a starting point. Of course, there's also Google. Try Hack Me. There's also a YouTube channel that I'll share as well that gives some visuals. I'm much more of a visual learner as well. So all right, let's see here. Ben Tech says that they passed the Security Plus and work in the public sector, but not as an IT position, hoping to move into GRC. Happy to share resources that have helped. Yeah, and one of the biggest things is that all of us come from different backgrounds. We've all had different experiences and so forth, and that's what makes it so useful for community. Rhonda says that they had subnetting down years ago, but haven't used it in many years. Yeah. I was not going to talk about subnetting today. That's just one example of like one of those things that I feel, you know, like network engineers are going to understand like the back of their hand, but everybody else kind of just neglects it later. Oh, yeah. And also, like Chris mentions that they were stuck for a couple hours on a VM homeland until they realized cloning in VirtualBox also copies the same MAC address for both. Yeah, and like I use Hypervisor now just because it's easier. I've had so many issues trying to set up VMs and so forth. Yalamed. Okay. I will try to keep that in mind. I'm horrible with names in the first place. Yalamed. All right. Sunny Classroom has really good subnetting videos. We'll have to check that one out. Welcome to the party, pal, Luke. Yeah, subnetting is rough. All right. Let's see here. Let me go ahead and get this pulled up. Just a little bit of background noise, I think, goes a little ways. All right. And then I got that. All right. And then here we go. Oh, and then it's not even at the very beginning. I have to restart it. All right, there we go. Now that's working. All right, and then I'm gonna try to keep up with chat the best that I can. If I do miss something, please forgive me. Just mention it again or otherwise. Also, adding me inside the Discord server is a great method as well. One of the only other things that I also did want to mention real quick before I forget is we did mention a merch shop with Study GRC. I finally got around to adding a couple more items on here. So I don't want anybody to feel obligated with it. There is like a 10 to 15% markup on these items. If you guys are interested or if there's other products that you guys want as well, I just wanted to throw that out there as well. I have not really pushed the merch shop at all because I never got around to adding the additional material on there. But I did get the hoodie, the hat, and the t-shirt added. One of the big reasons we went with Printful is because I wanted options that were cheaper because I don't like paying $30 for a t-shirt. But one of the downsides is this is pricing before shipping. But definitely let me know if you guys wanted anything else customized, so forth. There's more that we could add to it as well. All right, now that we're past the section that I hate doing, which is like self-promotion and so forth, but networking 101, a GRC focused introduction. So there's so much that goes into networking. I did want to kind of touch on a lot of these different topics from a GRC perspective. That's primarily our primary goal. And so it is absolutely necessary. So everybody asked, and we talked about it before, like how much technical do we need to know? How much technology do we need to know? And really it is more the better. I think it also really depends on like how often are you talking with your network team? Do you have network engineers? Do you guys, Does your business own a data center? Are you guys running your own servers or something? There's a lot of different factors that would make it more beneficial for you to know more or less, but at least understanding the basic concepts is the bare minimum. And, you know, just understanding how the internet works and why, you know, where some of the risk could be and so forth. So one of the biggest key things is, what is a network? So connecting devices, this is what a network is, what connects everything together. So you have your networks like inside of your own home, inside of your business. You could have multiple networks inside of a business, for an example, or a home. And then that connects to a larger network. And then that connects to an even bigger network. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in the future, here in a few slides. But then also, like, why does GRC even care? Well, because most of the data breaches, most of the issues that we end up trying to protect against come through the network. So of course, we also have insider threats, shadow IT. We have internal data breaches and so forth to an extent, physical security. There's a lot of different things and vulnerabilities that happened within the organization itself. However, a large majority of this is through the network. And that also gives us a leverage. It gives us the ability to try to detect and prevent and respond to those different events. So that's why it's so important. And the internet is crucial to business nowadays. So to most daily life at this point, it makes a huge impact, not only for personal usage, but then also a lot of businesses rely on the internet itself. So why are networks important? So communication, resource sharing, access to services. This is how our world revolves nowadays. We're communicating over the internet now. We use Discord. Businesses may use Slack or Teams or different things like that. We have our calendars on the internet. We have our file storage on the cloud and so forth. There's so many different things that we utilize at this point. So that's why networks are so important. And it's just huge now. So some of the basic networking components that I just wanted to mention from the get-go is you're going to have like your end user device here. So end user device, that's going to be your laptop. That's going to be your smartphone, maybe your smartwatch that connects to the internet. You know, you may even have some IoT, so Internet of Things, like web cameras, a Ring doorbell, different things like that. Even a thermostat nowadays or refrigerator could connect to your internet. And that's going to be like the end user devices, which is going to be like the first point. That's what most people are going to be familiar with. Now on the business side, that may look a little bit different. So we may have those workstations. We may have network like printers or fax machines or, you know, different types of things like that. There's also a few other different things like a NAS drive, which I'm going to go ahead and drop in chat real quick because I did not make a slide just for that. But NAS drive, so network attached storage. And so that is like a device that will be on the network as like its own device connected to your router or otherwise. And it's just for storage. Just, you know, if I wanted to start backing things up, I could get a NAS drive and connect that in. And if you guys have any questions, definitely drop that. I'm just going to be doing a bunch of knowledge dropping here. So definitely catch me if I'm just like going off on a rant here like I am with NAS. So the end user device section, that's what we're all going to be familiar with. And then the connected hardware, that's going to be like your actual Ethernet. And so like this is, oh, let me make this bigger here. So I'm going to go ahead and full screen this. And so like this is a Ethernet cable. So a lot of you guys have probably seen this before. It's pretty identifiable. It comes in a lot of colors, a lot of sizes and so forth, but they all look pretty much the same. I just had this handy. There's multiple different styles. You'll hear stuff like Cat 5, Cat 6, Cat 5e, all kinds of different stuff there. That's something that you could jump down the rabbit hole with as well. But so that's what I mean by like connected hardware. And then also you have like wireless cards. And so wireless cards can come in a variety of sizes and so forth too. So you'll hear like wireless card itself, which nowadays is typically built into the computer. Nowadays with the newer computers, like desktops, they may have it built into the actual motherboard itself. We talked about motherboards last week. And then also I'm going to go ahead and transition back over here. So inside of a laptop, you may have something like this. Is going to be like one of the most common styles, which you could see how it says WLAN, so wireless. So that's what that means. And then that's what it's going to look like inside of the laptop itself for most of them. However, nowadays it may be embedded on the motherboard itself, just like with desktops now. Now, even with desktops, you could typically go off and get a secondary type of network card where, you know, like this is a wireless network card that for a desktop. And this also comes in a lot of different sizes and so forth as well. You could also see like this one has an external antenna rather than just the ones pinned on the back side. So a lot of different styles and so forth. But then like wireless, I feel like wireless is more common nowadays. And also like this is a really good graphic because this also showcases how this particular wireless card here has Wi-Fi 6. It has Bluetooth. So yeah, it's kind of like a 2-in-1. So I just wanted to give an example. And then you also have like Wi-Fi adapters too. And so like this Netgear Wi-Fi adapter actually plugs into USB, but it will still allow you to connect to a wireless network. And you'll see, I see these less common nowadays. For the USB wireless adapters, but they're still certainly around. I think as time goes on, we're probably just going to see more and more of this embedded in the hardware, and not, you know, externally, other than maybe antennas. Also, like another interesting key fact here is inside a laptop. So laptops typically have this here, and just an interesting note is if you look at the very top of this, you'll see just trying to make that a little bit bigger there. So at the very top of this, you should be, I don't think you could see my cursor, but in the top corner, top right hand side, you'll see a 1 and a 2 very vaguely. That's actually where the antenna connects in, and inside of a laptop, you typically have your antennas that go up along the exterior of your monitor itself for the screen. Let's see here. Let me go ahead and transition back over there. Let me double check chat. Oh, and then I got to fix my audio here. Yeah, and so like Space Tacos asked, like, would a smart home count as an end user or a collection of IoT devices? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that I just mentioned end user devices here, you know, just to kind of consolidate all of that under, you know, one term. It really depends on what end you are on, but typically, you know, if I'm talking to somebody who's non-technical, I'm just going to be calling it their devices. So I'm not going to really use the term IoT devices to somebody who's non-technical or otherwise. Now, within a group of people that, you know, are more technical and so forth, then I probably would make that difference. Then I would say, you know, the end user device as in the laptop, smartphone devices that they actually physically use, and then separate out utilizing the term IoT for their smart home devices themselves. I think it just depends on the audience itself. That's why I kind of made that a little bit different. Yeah, and also like Fleetus also mentions is that IoT is also HVAC and lighting and pretty much everything that takes electricity at this point can be connected to the internet, it seems. Yeah, and Fleetus also mentions that it's technically all end user IoT industrial until you get to industrial. Yep, and then then we have those like the Ethernet cable that I showed, the Wi-Fi cards, and then that's when we move into routers and switches. Those are going to be the most common things that you'll come across. Most households are only going to have like a router, maybe a modem as well. Let me go ahead and pull that up here. So this is another thing that I've noticed that a lot of people who are non-technical are a little bit more familiar with. And so you probably have some box like this sitting around somewhere that you connect to the Wi-Fi from that, or you plug directly into it. And you could see here, like this has the power going to it, and then also an Ethernet cable coming in, which is probably for that internet from the internet service provider. And that's another one of the different terms, just so that way we can throw that out there. So ISP is going to be internet service provider. So that's a pretty common term, which is just what company you get your internet from. Who do you pay your internet bill to? Yeah, and like this is a close-up of like the backside of maybe a typical router. And you'll see, you know, you have LAN 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're also going to have like an inlet. There's so many different styles and so forth. Like here's another example of like more of a tower style. I think the more traditional ones are like these flatter boxes with the antennas coming up. That's actually similar to what I have. But yeah, it comes in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. And lots of different styles. Now, each one is going to be different too. There are different technologies that coincide with that. I didn't want to get too much into depth on just routers today. But if you guys do have questions, definitely drop those in chat or throw that into the Discord server as well. We could like go on a deep dive just about routers and so forth. And then, so that's going to be routers, but now a network switch. There's two key differences that I'll cover here in a moment. But so then a network switch itself is your router is routing the traffic. So that is what will actually be, you know, routing the traffic to various areas and so forth. There are routers that you could do some more complicated stuff with, but most of the time it's just going to route it. Whereas a switch is going to switch it to a particular device. So like you can see on this image here, so you have like 1 through 8 here. Inside of the software itself or otherwise, those are separated out. So they, you know, it already knows like, oh, okay, it's getting sent to this device. And that's one of the key differences with a network switch is it kind of refines the network down to an extent. And then also it's pretty common with some of the different network switches. You may have some type of firewall built onto it or some type of software or otherwise as well. And so like this is an example here. So you have your router. Yeah, you guys can see that pretty good. All right. So you have your router, your network switch, and then I don't really like this example here. So this type of configuration, the way that they show it on the diagram would be considered like a bus topography for the network. Whereas typically you'd have, the best way to think about this is that it'd be wireless. Some of these devices would be wireless, like your cell phone itself. But you can think of a wire going to the desktop, a wire going to the laptop, a wire going to the server and printer, all separate wires coming out of that network switch into those devices. So, and then also on the commercial end, this stuff gets way more complicated. So you could see here, like here's another example. So when you're running servers, when you're running workstations and so forth, it can also make the management side of it way easier as well. Even if it looks more complicated, it actually makes it way simpler. But yeah, like that's a nice photo right there. That's some good cable management. I think they could have used some more cable ties, but that's still really nice. Better than what I could do. Let's see. Yeah, that's not as clean. Yeah, see, now I'm already going down, like looking at cable management here. All right. And then after that, and I put this left to right here for a purpose, because we have our end user devices that connect to our connected hardware, like our Ethernet and fiber optic cables or Wi-Fi. And then that connects into our router and or switches. And then our routers and switches will typically relay into our ISP, which connects to the internet itself. And so like where I'm at, there's actually only one internet service provider. And so I connect into their network, and then they connect into the broader network of the internet itself as we know it. I left that last part out just for simplicity to an extent. However, that's one another interesting thing about the internet is you have all of these different ISPs that just connect in together. And so like one of their large hubs is actually out of Bismarck. So if my internet traffic itself, depending on where I connect to, what server I connect to, if I connect to a server on the East Coast, then my network traffic would actually flow into Minnesota to a hub where a bunch of internet service providers co-locate. Whereas if I connect to a different type of server, otherwise it'll auto route my traffic through the Bismarck hub itself. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that too. I find it really fascinating, but let me double check chat. If you guys have any questions or otherwise, definitely drop those. Yeah, then also like Fleetus also mentions a majority of homes are technically small businesses now that you have 10 to 20 devices connected. Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing is that there's not that big of a difference between the home and a small business at all because of all of those connected devices nowadays. And the technology really is pretty similar. There is some of the commercial hardware and so forth, but if you're running a small business, chances are, most of the time, you're running residential hardware. So, which is maybe not the best thing, but I mean, it definitely works. It's not a horrible thing either, depending on the size, of course, and what you're doing, but yeah. And then also Chris Hilgado mentions, I've had a lot of fun installing DD Wart and Tomato firmware. So I actually run OpenWart on my router. You get some mini features enabled. Yeah. Yeah, so he's talking about like actually changing the firmware, the software itself on the network routers. Yeah, and like B-Dubs mentions they don't even want to mention how many devices they have. Like for me, it's just me and the wife, and I mean, we probably have 10 devices in total, 10 or 12 devices. So, I mean, that's just 2 people, but that's also because we have smartwatches, we have our cell phones. I have a Kindle, we have our smart TVs, you know, and so forth. So yeah, a lot of those different devices, people don't even think about that. So it depends. So BenTech asks, home networks have a limit of 255 devices able to connect, correct? I think that really does depend itself, because you may be able to connect those devices, but that doesn't mean that it's going to actually operate. That's typically when I've heard of small businesses going from residential hardware to commercial hardware. Because like once you start reaching like 50, 80, 100 devices, maybe even less than that, especially if those are active, then you're going to have like serious quality of service issues. But theoretically, as far as like the IP addressing and so forth goes, B-dubs, you could always test that pretty easily. Hacker mindset. Welcome to the Party Pal Cyber Cycle. All right, and so moving forward here, so if you guys have any questions, definitely drop those in chat. You can always check us out on Discord as well if you guys have anything else to add. So then this next section here, so network devices, routers. So I just showed a moment ago the switches and the routers. Those are going to be the two most common things that you'll come across at all. This just kind of showcases, so like routers connect separate networks. They direct mail between towns. Switches link devices in one network. So that's a pretty condensed way to state that. And maybe using mail isn't the best method to say there, but later on, I'll probably pull up some of the different common network topologies, which is like how the networks are connected typically. And we could go through that a little bit more. Some of the different types of networks. So there are, I think, 5, 6, 7 different types per se. But so the most common that I feel that most people should know is going to be PAN, so personal area network, a LAN, and a WAN. So, and that's also where this Cloudflare website, which I'll swap over to here in a moment, goes into this as well, because I think they explain all of this very well. But so like a personal area network, like if you use your hotspot, for an example, that could technically be considered the personal area network or otherwise. Connects personal devices such as phone to a laptop, small range. Also, like another example would be that could be considered on Bluetooth as well, you know, like for your earbuds or your mouse or otherwise. Technically, it's not going over we're talking about networks here. We're not talking about the internet at this time. So technically it's still a network. So you have like your personal devices and so forth for a PAN. And then you also have LAN, so local area network. That's what's most typical. That's your standard network where you have your router, you have your devices connect to it and so forth. So small area like an office or home, typically owned and managed internally. And so that's going to be everything before it leaves your residence, before it leaves that address, basically. And then you have your wide area network. So large areas spanning cities or counties, cities or countries, often involving third parties. And that's also where like those different internet service providers come in and so forth. But so those are like the key areas that I wanted to showcase there. And so LAN is going to be the most important one, I would say. That's what you hear the most about. And so I'll drop this again here in a moment, but so they have an awesome page here for network types. And so on this page that I'll be dropping, you just hover over network types, and then you could see here local area network, wide area network. There's also like SD-WAN, metropolitan, campus area network, personal area network, autonomous systems, network as a service. What is enterprise networking? And so it goes into pretty good depth here, and it even showcases some examples. So like this is what a typical network's going to look like. So you're going to have your devices connected into your router, whether that's wireless or wired, and then that's going to connect into the internet. And this is going to be a typical configuration. And then it goes into more depth and explains it as well. So that's what I would recommend. It looks like it also does mention like the virtual LAN as well. And so like this section here, this is a pretty good mention. So virtual LANs or VLANs are a way of splitting up traffic in the same physical network to 2 networks. Imagine setting up 2 separate LANs, each with their own router and internet connection in the same room. VLANs are like that, but divided virtually using software instead of physically using hardware. And that's also where you get like some of the different switches and firewalls and things like that coming in, because you could set up those VLANs. Even on my router, because of the software that I have on it, I could actually go through and configure those as VLANs. And then you could also do another thing we'll talk about here soon is going to be subnets. So I think I have part of that up here as well. All right. This next section, so wired versus wireless, there's definitely going to be pros and cons. So I would say that nowadays wireless is going to be the most common for sure. Wireless is everywhere. I personally use wireless I do have an Ethernet cable if I need it, but it really just kind of gets in the way. If you have like a permanent installation, then that may be a little bit different. However, wireless is becoming way more common. Now, there are some different nuances here too, because also like in business, for an example, you may have wireless networks and so forth, but your workstations are most likely wired directly in. There's multiple different reasons for that. Like one thing with Wi-Fi itself is like congestion and interference and so forth. And you know, it could be very costly and so forth to diagnose and deal with having like a commercial Wi-Fi network for hundreds or even thousands of different devices. So wired can be way more simplistic because you know exactly where that wire is going. It's hardwired in. And then also there is, of course, the mention here too for more secure. Now, I wouldn't say that directly, but you'll definitely hear that around. Of course, wireless is going over the air. It does use different types of encryption, which I believe we'll cover here shortly as well. So it is encrypted typically, as long as you have to put in a password. Now, how safe that is kind of varies from device to device, based on what type of network you're connected to. But the key difference between the two is nowadays, I think it makes less sense, but most people will hardwire in with an Ethernet cable for internet speeds because it's more reliable. You don't get interference, you don't get drops in speeds and so forth as badly as you typically would on wireless networks. And just your straight to the port, straight to your computer, you're typically getting better speeds. But you could also go into the fact that it could be considered more secure because you're not sending anything over wireless. So that also puts less fingerprinting out there as well. So especially if you're in an area where, you know, maybe you have a coffee shop downstairs from your business or your home, you know, you never know if some, you know, gray hat or black hat might go to that coffee shop one day and just start picking up traffic and seeing what they could do and so forth. If you're directly hardwired in and you're not even using Wi-Fi, then that's going to make a significant difference. So that is one portion to mention as well. Now, some of the cons with that though too is you do have the physical cables that you have to run. That's typically what gets in the way, and then also the limited mobility. So that's like why I don't typically use Ethernet, is just because I like to grab and go. So, and like I said, I think today, especially for residential, I think the speeds are less of a concern just because of the high-speed internet services that we do have nowadays, but that also depends on your area and your plan and so forth as well. Unlike all of the cell phones nowadays are all wireless anyhow. And I didn't even mention like 5G or cell tower. We also have like Starlink now, which provides internet from satellites. Let me double check chat here before I get too far behind. Yeah, and so like CyberCycle, I think, was mentioning regarding the amount of devices. And so, yeah, that's the DHCP. So that's Domain Host Control Protocol or something. So that's the actual service that issues out the local addressing. So we will be talking a little bit about like the local IP addresses and so forth. And so that's the limitation that you really have. I think you're going to hit a quality of service issue before you hit a device cap with most residential level hardware. Yeah, and welcome to the Party Pal, CyberCycle. I hope everything's going well with you as well. We're halfway through the week now. Bam, GRC Mafia. Oh, thanks for joining in, Rhonda. You have a great rest of your day. Oh, and also Space Tacos is in the house. I don't think I threw her out. Welcome to the Party Pal. Yeah, even Tacos Space Tacos has a command here for her website and server as well. So she has an entire archive Discord server that is really great to just go and search. So all kinds of different stuff, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of different resources around GRC. There's a lot in there for like mental health and courses and all kinds of stuff as well. So definitely check that out. I just put that in chat. Yeah, definitely more rabbit holes and so forth. There's so much that you could deep dive into networking and many different topics. It's actually really insane. Oh, and I forgot to swap back to the slide deck from that page, but that's fine. So I had talked about the types of networks and then the wired and wireless here. So this is what I was talking about a moment ago, the wired and wireless networks here for the slide deck. And then now moving on to understanding IP addresses. So an IP address identifies a device, for an example, 192.168.1.1. I hope you guys can see that on your end. Yeah, okay, perfect. And so there's two primarily different types. Well, technically there's way more than two different types, but to make it a little bit more straightforward, you have IPv4, which you'll hear about, and then also IPv6. So IPv4 is what we've been using for decades now, and we started implementing IPv6. There's been like recent security issues around it and so forth, but that's what we are starting to lean into as IPv6. The reason being is because we have like over 4 billion devices on the internet nowadays, and so every single network gets its own IP address. So that's what is shown externally. So your router itself has an IP address that is assigned from your internet service provider. So whoever you pay your internet bill to, they issue you a IP address that you have. Now, a business may have more than one, or depending on the environment, you know, like a data center is going to have thousands of them. There is a cost related to that as well. And so that's also where IPv6 comes in, because with the amount of devices that we have on the internet nowadays, we had to come up with a different idea. We had to come up with a different, more unique identifier. And so you can see here the example, IPv6 is way bigger. So it can handle way more devices and has way more growth to it than IPv4, which is like maxed out. So as far as the IP addressing goes for IPv4, because you can only have so many of those different addresses worldwide, which is also one area on where like the cost comes in. Like for an example, if you use Cloudflare DNS. So DNS, I don't believe I had in my slide deck here, but so DNS is domain name service. And so when you, I should probably put that in there. So, domain name service. And so TryHackMe also has a really great room on DNS. But so like I just dropped in chat 1.1.1.1. So that is the IP address for Cloudflare's DNS, which is pretty common nowadays. It's a little bit, people claim that it's more private or faster than your internet service provider. So by default, typically when you type in studygrc.org, your computer is actually going to send a request to DNS, which is going to be actually configured inside of your system, which normally that's going to be auto configured from your ISP, your internet service provider. And it's going to send a request to your internet service provider saying, hey, where do I find studygrc.org? Where is that located? Like what server is that? And when it makes that request and so forth, typically it goes to your ISP. You can change that to like Cloudflare DNS, where it'll actually send that request to Cloudflare rather than your internet service provider, which is what I prefer. And typically it's faster and so forth. And yeah, and Ventec mentions that IPv6 scares them. Yeah. I heard about like a recent vulnerability with IPv6 of some sort. I'd have to look it back up, but I've heard that there's been quite a few issues with it. And to be honest with you, I've always had the IPv6 completely disabled. So it's something that we'll have to probably deal with in like 10 years, but it does exist at least. So yeah, we could do a deep dive into DNS even too. Like there's so much that goes into it. But that's the gist of it, is it makes a call out to figure out what server is that website located at. And then that server will respond and say, hey, this is where you locate that. And then typically you'll have like your own cache file, your own reserve on your computer that will save that for an X period of time as well before it checks again. So this is just some of the basics. And so like if it starts with 192.168, you can go into a deep dive with this as well. That's going to be a local address. And you just know that because of the beginning numbers of it. And there's all kinds of different stuff that goes into that. That's another section where this Cloudflare website really comes in really handy. I love this page. So if you take another look at this Cloudflare page, you can go ahead and networking basics. There was a section, oh yeah, here, internet protocol. So IP. And so what is the internet protocol? So IP. And then it actually goes into depth and it talks about how IP addresses actually work. And, you know, IPv4 versus IPv6 and so forth, along with a bunch of other information as well. So definitely highly recommend this page here. There's all kinds of information here for some of the basics to learn. And I'm dropping this in chat again too. Look at B-dubs being, you know, childish. You could definitely tell that she's got children or otherwise, probably. Let's see. All right, now swapping back over to my slide before I forget. And if you guys have any questions to anything related to this or other networking questions, definitely drop those in chat. You can also drop them on Discord or otherwise too, even after the stream itself. If I don't know the answer, we could figure it out together, or there's definitely other people in the community that's more than willing to help. So some of the basic network security things here that I just wanted to mention is, so we also have firewalls. So firewalls get a little bit complicated to try to explain for me, because you typically have multiple. So like you have, most devices have a firewall built onto your computer itself by default, just within Windows itself. Same thing with Mac as well, where you can restrict connections from certain devices or otherwise. You could do that through like a host file. You could do that through software and so forth as well, to block traffic to and from on your device itself. And so I could connect to a network and I could say on that device, I could say, oh, don't accept any connections from google.com, or block that entirely or whatever. So you have that option. But then also, like most routers nowadays also have that ability. It may be under, depending on what type of device you have, it may be underneath some type of parental controls or something along those lines. But you could typically have some type of basic software, you know, just like you install Discord, for an example, or a browser. It's software-based firewalls where in your router, you could also block traffic as well, or control how that traffic is managed. Encryption. So encryption scrambles data, so only authorized people can see it. That is the goal of encryption. However, it is extremely important to note that just because something is encrypted does not mean that it's not decryptable. So there are encryption algorithms that are out there that I still see being used that are considered insecure. So like one example is like if your Wi-Fi is using WEP, that is a very old, like I don't even know how old it would be, but like I think that was more popular like 15, 20 years ago, like in the 2000s. And so that's considered insecure now. And so like one of the most up-to-date ones is WPA3 for the encryption for wireless networks. And so there's multiple different types. WPA, WEP. Let's see. And so also, if you look at like the commercial side of this, it goes way more into depth. So you can go into a deep dive on the different types of encryption utilized for networks. And there's a lot more that goes into it. One of the key things to keep in mind is when you go through and you set up your router or you sign into it, which if you look on your router itself, you probably have a sticker on there that says like, oh, the admin panel is located at so-and-so, which is typically starts with like 192.168. And then it's typically going to be either 0.0, 0.1 or 0.1.1. And it'll have the admin username and password on the sticker on the router itself. Nowadays, we're fortunate enough to where those admin passwords are randomized for most of the routers and so forth, but that will typically allow you to sign into your admin panel, and you'll be able to actually sign in and configure some of these settings. What I see most common with a lot of these networks is people set up a router 10 years ago and it's still running WPA or one of these less secure options. Whereas like WPA3 just has a higher level of encryption. So that's one of the different things to mention, but also just when you work with encryption at all, it's just important to note the fact that there are many different types of encryption. AES is probably one of the more common ones. There's a lot of other types as well, but definitely do a little bit more research into that if you're going to mess around with those settings. There's also a compatibility issue too to mention. So like WPA3, for an example, WPA2, and I want to put this in chat. So WPA2 versus WPA3. So WPA2 is probably one of the more common ones now, and then WPA3 came out a few years back. For an example, my network utilizes the WPA3, and one of the points that I wanted to make there is that there is a compatibility issue. And so I actually have to run a separate network, like a guest network, just for my smart TV, because like my smart TV does not connect to WPA3 at all. And so that's just how it works. And you'll probably come across that depending on what type of devices you have. But just to mention potential compatibility issues. All right, and then let's go ahead and push through. And then also secure protocols too. So just to mention really quick, so many people have probably noticed that that HTTPS, that creates like a secured connection to that website. So you'll see that in front of links all the time. Especially nowadays, you should always use that. So inside of your browser settings, I may be able to actually pull it up for you. I don't know if it'll even let me stream that part for my browser settings or not. Let's see here. I wanted to see if I could even pull this up. I don't know, but typically inside of your browser settings or even on your devices, you could force that. And so, yeah, let me go ahead and see if I can pull this up. And so this is inside of my browser settings for Brave. And so it's going to be a little bit different for each one, but you can go in here and you can actually do this to where upgrade connections to HTTPS, and I have this marked as strict. And so it's going to alert me and let me know like, hey, this is not HTTPS, which is secured, or at least hopefully secured. I mean, you still have to realize you're still connecting to somebody else's server. But at least that traffic in between should be encrypted, which does at least make the process more difficult for different types of attacks. Thanks for helping in, Space Tacos. Good luck with the rest of your day. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a better way to put it too, CyberCycle, that the endpoint compatibility sets the standard for encryption. So yeah, it has to do with the devices more than anything else. Because it's just like one of my smart TVs only connects to WPA2, which is the only reason I have a WPA2 wireless network. But yeah, it can definitely vary there. But I just wanted to show you this setting here inside of Brave itself. You'll find these types of settings in other browsers as well, where you can force the HTTPS. All right, and then, so protecting the network passwords. So you definitely want to use strong passwords. Now, one of the downsides is most devices nowadays do not allow you to do MFA. My particular router does allow MFA, but also that's because it's running different software. So if you guys wanted to look into it, I use a router software called OpenWart, which is an open source software that just gives you like full access and ability to whatever you want to do. It's basically running like a Raspberry Pi, and it's running open source software for my router itself. There's so much that goes into that as well. You also want to keep it up to date. Most of the devices nowadays, especially routers, will auto update every so often. Like they'll check once a week or whatever it is, and it'll update. And then I wanted to touch on the network segment. So segmenting networks out. That's also where you get like network switches and so forth. And so like for an example, it would be easier if I pull up a diagram here. Let me see here. I'm double checking this website here to see if they have a diagram for segmentation. I'll just pull this one up for now. So like this is an example of a network switch itself. And so network segmentation is when you separate out multiple different networks within the same. And so like for an example on this diagram here, you see you have the internet and then you have the router itself. Well, then you also have a switch. Now off of that switch that's connected to the router, you could have, in this example, 2 different devices. You could have 5, you could have 20, you could have, I mean, they have network switches that are massive, huge in size. And so you could have multiple different switches. And so like for an example, I could set up a network switch on my network that connects to my home office, which is gonna, and I could configure that with virtual LANs and so forth and have that network segmentation. So that way it's considered a separate network underneath that router, which also, it's a preventive measure to an extent because it separates things out. Inside of the router settings, you'll typically see this mentioned as like network isolation, which is just software based. And so you could see here, like on this diagram, if we had added another switch, then that's going to connect directly to the router and it's not going to connect back to that other switch, to switch 1. And so that's where you can go through with particular type of hardware and so forth and do network segmentation. And so like my wife's craft room, I could put on its own network itself, utilizing switches and so forth, and have my home office separately. Now, one reason you'll see this in business is not only for management, it makes the network easier to manage itself. It could be easier to diagnose issues when you can, narrow it down to a particular network or otherwise, or a particular switch. And then also, you also have like a security level with that as well. So for an example, if my device gets compromised, it's not impossible, but it's designed in such a way that it's going to be more difficult hopefully more difficult for a threat actor to jump from one subnet to another. So I have seen some different methods that could still occur, and it's definitely still possible. I think especially when it comes to threat actors, I wouldn't put anything past them. So nothing is 100% secure, but it is designed to, that's where the pyramid of pain comes in. And that's actually something I'm going to mention too, just because it's so important. I'm going to pull that up in a moment. So before we end here, I'm going to go over and just showcase the pyramid of pain. But so just to give you a little bit of an idea, that's like what we're talking about with network segmentation, where you separate the networks out on the same router. And you could even have a configuration where you have multiple different routers, but it connects to the same internet service provider. In larger businesses and so forth, you may have multiple internet service providers for redundancy or to completely separate. And actually, there's a name for that. Air gapping. So air gapping is another term, which I'll just briefly mention here. So air gapping or air gapped, that is like a misconception because it seems like there's a disconnect in the industry with some people where they don't fully understand what air gapping exactly means. And so that's when there two different networks, for an example, or two different devices cannot connect back together. And so an example of this would be like one of the different production environments I've heard about is they had like their workstations and then they had their server, and they're supposed to have that air gapped. So that means that they cannot communicate together. Now, what happened is they ended up running everything back to the router itself. And so that means that if it connects back to this router right here, then, which I can't highlight or anything else, but if both of those devices connect back to that router, then that makes a connection between the two, where an attacker could pivot from one to the other or otherwise. A true air gap system has no connections between the two. And so you could even have an issue where even if you use the same internet service provider, technically speaking, it is not air gapped because it still creates some type of connection between the two. And so that's where it gets a little bit more complicated to an extent. It's going to be extremely rare to ever come across that. But just as a mention, that's another topic that you guys could deep dive into. Bandwidth and latency. So bandwidth is like how wide the road is, like how many vehicles could you fit going down the road on that network and so forth, how wide it is, how much you could send at one time, whereas the latency is like the time it takes. That's in relation to the delay. So like, especially in gaming, you'll see like, oh, I get 30 pings or 60 pings or whatever it is. And so the latency is the speed in which lower is better. Whereas bandwidth, more is better. So the higher the number of bandwidth, then the faster your connection is. That's where you, like with internet service providers, like you'll get 500, which is 500 megabytes up and down. You may have a lower plan of like 100 for 100 megabytes per second or something. And there's way more than that as well. Whereas like latency just depends on like where you're located and then also how your network travels. So if I try to connect to a server in Japan, for an example, my latency is going to be way higher, which is a bad thing compared to trying to connect to a server, here in North Dakota. So then how might network outages affect your organization's risk? So we've already talked about this quite a bit and so forth, and that's quite an interesting image from AI there. Wow, that definitely screwed up some of those faces there. But with just what we've talked about so far, I'm sure you can come up with some different ideas of how important networks are, and then also what kind of carnage can occur if there is a network outage. But it's not all about network outage either. Not only is that a form of risk and so forth, but one of the other big concerns with networks is just the security aspect of it. Because even if you don't have a network outage, there is a lot of issues with networks. That's how hackers are able to go through and pivot from one machine to the next. That's how a lot of attacks come into the network itself, and so many different other methods as well. So it's definitely a big thing in today's world. So we talked a little bit about the basics of the networks, and then also we could talk more about the business impact. So like, I mean, we could talk about that a little bit more, but I hope that everybody does understand that networks are a massive part of business and everyday life nowadays. And it is extremely vital and important, which is one of the big reasons why networking may be one of the topics that GRC should actually be more familiar with is because networking is not going anywhere. It's not advancing to where it's going to, completely change and so forth. The concepts are all still pretty much the same as they were 20 years ago. And sure, there are advancements, there's new technologies that come out, new versions and so forth, but the concepts remain the same. And so that is where that security focus comes in, is because networks are a crucial aspect of business continuity. Oh yeah, and then I had already mentioned like the network segmentation a little bit here. So what is it? Dividing networks into smaller ones, isolating different parts out. And then also it matters because it can limit the impact of a data breach, because you can have separate networks that make it more difficult to communicate with each other. Like I said, there are different attack techniques that have been used in the past to where an attacker could still go from one segment to another and work their way through it. However, it's all about that pyramid of pain, which I'm going to mention here at the end. We do have a couple other things that I wanted to mention too. So like intrusion detection systems, you may come across this. And so that just detects. And so this is typically software or a device that you put on your network itself. And it's going to monitor traffic, alert administrators, enhance security. So this may be something that actually feeds into your SIM. Which is going to show alerts and let you know if it detects anything based on filters that you set up. And so an important thing with this is just intrusion detection. So if it sees something that's suspicious, it's going to notify, is the goal of it, but it's not going to do anything about it. And so that just goes by the term of IDS for intrusion detection systems. There's another one that's called intrusion prevention systems. And the key difference between an IDS and an IPS is an IPS will actually take real-time action. This is when you have like deep packet, like when it's actually analyzing the packets deeply and so forth. And so when you connect to a website, or better yet, if you go to download a file, if I try to download a PDF file and I have an intrusion prevention system or intrusion detection system, then it's going to analyze that file. It's going to compare it and everything else and try to see, oh, does this have any signatures or telltale signs of this being malicious or otherwise? And if it does alert that, oh, hey, this, is malicious, then an intrusion prevention system can actually stop that entirely at that network. So before it even gets to the device itself, it could actually stop it entirely. And this is also where just being very preventive comes in, especially with phishing emails becoming so common for ransomware and malware and so forth. This kind of stuff could really come in handy. So yeah, and a lot of that stuff has to be configured, set up, monitored. I mean, it adds a lot of cost to business. And so you don't see that in small businesses really, but some of those bigger businesses, several hundred people, a few thousand people, yeah, that's where you'll see that stuff way more common. Of course, that also depends on the business itself. Let me double check the chat here. And if you guys have any questions or otherwise, definitely drop those in chat. I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable to do so. If you want to come up on stage, definitely feel free to let me know, and I could go ahead and drop that link for you. Yeah, and then also CyberCycle mentions a key difference between the two is IDS runs in parallel, mirrored port with ingress. IPS runs in a series with the connection. Yeah, and yeah, that's a good mention too. So, yeah. So you have IPS on the actual line, whereas an IDS is running parallel, mirrored back and forth. And then another mention here too, this is probably even less common, unfortunately, but in the bigger businesses, you may see this, is an XDR. So extended detection and response. And so this is typically separate software entirely that will actually collect logs. You could kind of relate it to a SIM to an extent, but it correlates, like it states right here, correlates data across networks, endpoints, and cloud environments. You can connect all of your devices into it and so forth, collect log data, You can install their devices or otherwise. And it just has even more detection and response built into it. And then, you know, this is what you'll see. This is like more high dollar type of stuff. And yeah, and so like Luke Canfield saying, XDR. This is definitely more high dollar level of security. However, I believe it is becoming more and more common and hopefully more affordable. If I ever could go through and affordably run an XDR in my network, I would. So that's another term that I would recommend to dig a little bit deeper into. That's going to be for those bigger businesses more so. The future of networking for GRC. So I also just wanted to mention cloud is becoming absolutely massive. We're coming to an end here in just a moment. And I also wanted to mention the pyramid of pain as well for those of you who may not be familiar with it. But so everything's going to the cloud. So many things are going into the cloud. I think it is a positive thing, but it's just like during the keynote for Mile High with Wild West Hacking Fest, they were talking about how we need more people who are hacking AWS or Azure and these other cloud platforms and so forth. And so although these concepts remain the same in the cloud, there are nuances to the cloud itself. You're making that stuff on demand. So you can still do subnetting. You could still set up IPSs and IDSs in the cloud. You could do all of this different stuff in the cloud. It may have some different terminology based on the network, the platform that you utilize or otherwise, but the concepts all pretty much maintain the same. And then also you have an added benefit of automation tools as well. So it can actually be easier to deploy a lot of this in the cloud as well. But of course, as most of us may know, is the cloud also has a lot of security concerns, a lot of risk out there as well. So that's where like misconfiguration is a big one. Definitely make sure that you go through and you double check configurations. Your access control. I believe one of the things I was going to mention is ACL. So access control list. Access control is a big one, especially for misconfigurations. So thanks for hopping in, CyberCycle. You have a great rest of your day. And so that's just a big thing. And so this is actually an area where I've talked about, like, I really need to improve on. I'm more familiar with AWS among all of the cloud platforms. However, just getting into cloud at all is extremely vital. It's just becoming more and more common. They're building more data centers. It's becoming cheaper and so forth. And so it's something we should all be upskilling in. Cloud security. So, you know, data breaches still happen. Compliance is still an issue. DDoS attacks, insider threats, all of that stuff still applies in the cloud as well. One of the different things I wanted to mention here is that it's not that it's safer in the cloud or that it's less secure in the cloud. It could be considered less secure in the cloud depending on how you do it. But I've heard from people in the past where they're like, oh, the cloud is safer because it's inside of a data center, a billion-dollar data center, so it's more secure. That is very, very wrong. So very wrong. That is not the right mindset to have. It all is based on there's a shared responsibility model, and I highly recommend if you are moving into the cloud or messing with that at all to check out the shared responsibility model, because you still have to go through and configure everything yourself. You still need to go through and make sure that you have things set up properly and so forth. So thanks for hopping in, Regine. Have a great rest of your day. So there's a lot more that goes into that. Yeah, and now this is just like the Q&A section here portion. And let me go ahead and transition this over. Let's see here. Yeah, and we definitely went over by about 27 minutes, but that's okay. So we are trying to keep these videos to about an hour. Let me double check something. All right, so I do actually need to hop off here in a moment. So I do have a meeting here in a few minutes. So I will be ending the live stream here in just a moment. But yeah, thank you for everybody for hopping in. And Ritu, I do see your message here for can you go over subnetting? I do have a meeting here in a couple minutes. However, I can go ahead and drop that information into Discord as well. So there's some resources there, and then we could also always talk about that at tomorrow's meeting as well. So I hope to see you guys tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Central. Tomorrow is just our open discussion chat and everything else. We don't have any pre-designated topics. Later today, I'll go ahead and at you inside of the Discord server with you and with some of the different network segmentation. There's also a YouTube channel I had mentioned that provides a visual for subnetting. So yeah, I have that noted down. So I'll drop those later today. But yeah, thank you all for hopping in and listening to me talk over this. I hope you guys found it useful. We did not cover anywhere near as many topics as there are in networking, but this just gives you more to think about and points you kind of in the right direction there. But yeah, thank you all for hopping in. I will catch you guys tomorrow and inside of the Discord server. Have a great rest of your day. GRC